Welcome to Asian American Life. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo. We are feeling festive this month. That's because we're inside the Museum of Natural History in front of the Origami Tree. Did you know that there are more than 1,000 animal models on this tree? Well, I'll have more on how this magic happens, but first, here's a look at what's ahead on our show. Celebrating 20 years of youth leadership with ASAP. Lessons learned from the Alien Enemy Act. Author Jane Hyun's leadership tips on breaking the bamboo ceiling. And Mubarak, blessed holiday incorporates Eastern and Western traditions. This and more on Asian American Life.
I'm Vivian Lee. The Origami Tree here at the American Museum of Natural History has been a holiday tradition for decades. This year's theme is Jumping for Joy, featuring more than 2,000 animals that all leap for a living.
We've got some monkeys, a lot of frogs, grasshoppers,
kangaroos. Most birds will do a little bit of hopping. We have fish, we have a whale jumping out of the water.
The Origami Tree is right up there on the list of New York City holiday must-sees. Jumping for Joy is a nod to 2024's leap year. Volunteers, young and old, from across the country and around the world make every piece. Some, like this collection of cicadas that will be turned into a garland, are new. Others, like this dinosaur from 1977, have withstood the test of time. Rosalind, Joyce, and Talo Kawasaki are with Origami USA, and they volunteer as co-designers of the tree every year.
It's magic, it's math. Take an ordinary piece of paper, sometimes not even a square, and with a few motions, you make something that's magic.
My father taught me how to fold an origami crane, and it just so happens we were going to fly to Japan for the first time. You're not adding to it, you're not cutting or taking away from it. You start with this one thing, and then you transform it into something totally unexpected.
What is expected? Crowds that want to marvel at what can be made out of paper. Past exhibits, like 2021's Gems of the Museum, 2013's Wicked, Wild, and Wonderful, and 2018's Oceans of Origami, were inspired by the museum's own exhibits. It all started in 1972 with entomologist, scientific illustrator, and teacher Alice Gray. An avid origamist herself, she made a small Christmas tree for the entomology department, covered in paper insects. One of the museum's board trustees happened to see it.
And she was telling her that it would be great if the museum had an origami tree. Next thing Alice is hearing is, oh, the trustees want to see examples of origami. And so she sends them some samples. Then a little later, Alice gets a note. It says, we've ordered a 25-foot tree. Can you have it decorated for the holidays?
And we worked on it.
Origami was popularized and perfected in Japan several years ago, after paper was introduced to the Japanese by Chinese monks. Some believe paper folding as an art began in China. Paper was a luxury centuries ago, so paper decorations were only for special occasions and ceremonies, and the rich. Today, it's enjoyed by millions all over the world.
Fold it all the way down. There's going to be a bit of a gap.
CUNY TV intern Lisbeth Fuentes Asensio and I tried our hands at a paper cicada, with Kawasaki taking us through just 7 steps.
And then we can open it up and slide those flaps together so that we can have our 3-dimensional cicada, right? You leave it with us, and we will attach it on a piece of wire and decorate it on the tree.
Very cute. Look for our cicadas on the Origami Tree at the American Museum of Natural History. The tree will be up until January 20th, 2025. For Asian American Life, I'm Vivian Lee.
Now let's get to our next segment, ASAP. And when I say ASAP, I'm talking about the Asian American Student Advocacy Project. They've been empowering young students for the last 20 years to be the next generation of leaders. It's Friday night. Do you know where your teenagers are? Well, we found a group of young people gathering at CACF, the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. After a long week at school, they make the trek to Wall Street on a Friday evening to participate in ASAP, the Asian American Student Advocacy Project.
I just thought it was really important to be able to advocate for a pretty unrepresented community like AAPI students, because they're always it's like a small demographic and they don't really have a voice.
Since 2004, ASAP has educated, trained, and equipped Asian American students like Jason to be changemakers and advocates for their families, communities, and schools.
We founded it over 20 years ago. When CACF started our education policy work, we thought it was really important that the people who are impacted day to day had a say in the policies that impact their schools. So that's our young people.
For the last 2 decades, more than 350 Asian American and Pacific Islander young people from 20 diverse ethnic backgrounds from all 5 boroughs and beyond have taken part in ASAP. 90% of the students also qualify for reduced or free lunch. At ASAP, they learn important leadership and civic skills. You'll find them speaking out on the steps of City Hall and testifying at important budget hearings.
No one should have to feel that their mental health needs are an inconvenience. A student well-being should always be a top priority, because if students are not well, then the school system is failing them.
I think as a collective, having these students being able to come out, during this recent example, there were so many budget cuts that were going to come down to our public schools last city budget. And our ASAP students went to 4 out of the 5 town halls to just even share what they were what they were seeing in their schools and what they needed funded.
The Asian population growing in New York, so too the number of AAPI students enrolled in the city's public schools. They now make up almost 19% of the student population, almost equal to the Black student population of 19.5%. In 2023, New York City rolled out a new curriculum to teach about Asian American history and culture, not just in response to the growing numbers of students, but the incidents of hate and bullying during the COVID-19 pandemic. ASAP students played a role in speaking out against the hate, demanding administrators to take action. It's just one of the many issues the students have tackled, and people are taking notice. Even former New York Knicks basketball player Jeremy Linn.
I have so much hope for the future because of youth leaders like you all.
The work is never ending. During our recent visit, the current cohort of 36 were practicing their campaign presentations, one focused on language access, another on mental health. CACF staff members, along with board members, were on hand to give the students feedback.
Do you feel like ASAP has helped your confidence?
ASAP has very much helped my confidence in my public speaking skill, because here they're just really appreciate advocacy, making policy, and it's very important for API leaders. Since we're leaders, we should be very good at advocating ourselves.
Kyae Latt, a recent immigrant from Myanmar, also appreciates connecting with her Asian identity and learning her shared history with other Asians and minority groups. And equally as important, she's found her voice.
I learned here that you just have to open up, share what you what you are, and don't feel embarrassed.
But for some of them, it was really for them the first time that they've had a space to understand who they are within this really kind of socio-political identity as AAPI, what that meant, but really the importance of wow, my voice, my story is important for people to hear, people in power to hear, listen to, and act upon.
So, on this Friday night, we know where the ASAP students are. They're working to change their world. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo for Asian American Life.
Mass deportations are on Donald Trump's agenda, and he's threatened to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, the law that laid the foundation to imprison thousands of Americans of German, Italian, and Japanese ancestry during World War II. Americans like Margaret Yamamoto, who spent the first 2 years of her life in an American concentration camp.
This is before the war broke out, and that's the grocery store behind them.
Margaret Yamamoto suspects she was in her mother's womb when this photo was taken at her parents' grocery store on Terminal Island, just south of Los Angeles. The 4 square mile strip of land was home to a thriving Japanese-American fishing community that helped establish the tuna industry.
There were about 3,000 residents of that island, and they were mostly Japanese and Japanese-American. The men were fishermen because they fought for the tuna and mackerel that was so plentiful off the California coast. And the women worked at the canneries that were located on Terminal Island.
Then, December 7, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Army attacked Pearl Harbor, killing more than 2,400 U.S. soldiers and civilians, launching America into World War II. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, a wartime authority that allows presidents to summarily detain and deport non-citizens who come from an enemy nation. Within days of the bombing, men of Japanese ancestry were rounded up on Terminal Island.
It didn't matter if you were Nisei, American-born, or Issei, you came from Japan as an immigrant. They were arresting all of them. And it included the teachers of Japanese language, the ministers, all of the men, because they were somehow involved in something like that could be, I guess, construed as being working with the enemy. When people were being arrested, they didn't know if they were going to just go to a prison somewhere, or if they were going to be killed, or what was going to happen to them. They were just taken away. They were not told what they were being arrested for. Families were terrified.
It was a fearful time. On the mainland, thousands of Japanese, Germans, and Italians suspected to be enemies were forcibly removed and incarcerated. Thousands were later deported. Then on February 19, 1942, more terror, when President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the forced removal of all persons deemed a threat to national security from the West Coast.
On February 25th, 6 days later, armed soldiers were delivering military orders to all the residents of Terminal Island, telling them that they had 48 hours to leave their homes and the island. There was no provision made to help them move off the island. There was no provision made for them to go anywhere, to live or to sleep or anything. They were just told, get out.
Yamamoto was just 2 months old when her family and thousands of people of Japanese ancestry were forcibly removed from their home and placed in temporary shelters. Some were housed in horse stalls at the Santa Anita racetrack. After a couple of months, the Yamamoto family of 6 was transferred to a concentration camp on the Gila River Indian Reservation in the Arizona desert.
They lived in barracks that were divided, military-style barracks, that were divided into living spaces about 20 by 25 feet in size. And there were dust storms practically every day. So you were cleaning and sweeping dust out of your room no matter what happened. My mother had to put layers of wet cheesecloth over where I was sleeping. She was afraid I would inhale the sand. That was how she protected me while we were living in camp.
Yamamoto spent the first 2 years of her life behind a barbed wire fence. More than 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were placed in 10 concentration camps scattered across the United States during World War II. More than half were U.S. citizens, including Paul Watanabe's mother and siblings.
Yeah, well, see, now my mother is referred to as an alien enemy.
Watanabe is director of the Institute for Asian American Studies at UMass Boston. A Nisei, or second-generation Japanese American, his family was forcibly relocated from their home in Utah to a concentration camp in Tule Lake in Northern California.
There was no habeas corpus. There was no attempt in which any courts were able to look at individual cases with individuals that simply, if you were characteristic of this population.
Distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race.
In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act, issuing an apology and reparations to the Japanese American families placed in camps under the Alien Enemies Act. But that antiquated law is now rearing its ugly head.
I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to target and dismantle every migrant criminal network operating on American soil.
The law requires not only that there be an invasion or a predatory incursion underway, that incursion or invasion must also be perpetrated by a foreign nation or government. And the theory here for the Trump team is that cartels or gangs from Mexico and Venezuela constitute in some way a foreign nation or government.
Katherine Ebright is an attorney at the nonpartisan Brennan Center for Law and Policy.
Conceivably, anyone who is a non-citizen, and that could be an undocumented person all the way up to a green card holder or permanent resident, could conceivably be placed into one of these camps.
Civil rights groups are preparing to fight the possible implementation of the Alien Enemies Act, but the rhetoric has had a chilling effect on Margaret Yamamoto.
I kind of feel almost personally invaded or personally attacked. These immigrants that he's talking about look different. When will that label of immigrant be attached to me because I look different? It is already attached to me because I look different.
Professor Watanabe warns that we should cut through the xenophobia with empathy. The majority of undocumented immigrants come to the United States for the same reason his father came to America a century ago.
My father, he came to the United States because he saw the promise of America.
Watanabe sees the promise of America when it's reflected by a majority-minority country in about 20 years. And Yamamoto is writing a book to share her family's story so that we can learn from the injustices of our past.
We truly are a nation of immigrants, and our country, their parents too were immigrants once. That's why we're all here.
For Asian American Life, I'm Rainer Ramirez.
I'm Kyung-Yoon. Author and leadership strategist Jane Hyun is widely known for coining the term bamboo ceiling, that barrier to career progress for Asian Americans. Now she has a new book that updates what's changed and what still needs to be done.
I think that we can probably all benefit from this universal idea that we need to be effective at managing cultures and leading multicultural teams.
Jane Hyun has dedicated her career to advancing Asian American leadership in the workplace. Her latest book, Leadership Toolkit for Asians, follows on her groundbreaking bestseller, Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, that was published in 2005. She says she saw the need to write an updated guide to help Asians navigate differences in work cultures and challenge companies to lead their employees with a multicultural lens.
I was seeing that, we couldn't really make the change on our own, and we needed organizations to really intervene and provide kind of a fertile environment for people who are not like everybody else to be successful, right, from a non-dominant culture group. So that was one of the reasons. I think the other reason was during COVID. I saw the anti-Asian hate sentiments. I saw that there was still a lot of misunderstanding and stereotypes about Asian Americans, right, that were out there, that were out in the community.
What are a couple of the key findings from your research for this book?
Yeah, there's a couple of key findings that I thought were really important for me to convey. One of them was just the whole presence of the model minority myth is alive and well. Asians are not the model minority, but they're treated as one. Another finding was Asians are still less likely to be sponsored, right, in companies. And so if you're working at a large organization, and probably not just a corporate setting, right, you really need a sponsor. You really need someone who can pull you up and recommend you for assignments and pull you in there for assignments that get you visible.
According to the Harvard Business Review, Asian Americans are the least likely of any group to be promoted to leadership roles in corporate America. Hyun says Asian Americans account for 13% of the professional workforce, but only 3% of Fortune 500 corporate offices. Hyun's advice: simply working hard won't help you break into the senior executive ranks. Instead, she says, be aware of the 3 phases of leadership to grow your career.
So the first phase of leadership is kind of reliable producer, right? Are you good at what you do? Do you do a lot of it, right? Are you liked by your clients? It's sort of, that early phase when you're first entering a company or an organization in any practice where you're just doing the work, right? The next phase of leadership, it happens usually when you become a manager or a middle manager, where it's less about what you do, right, and what you produce, but about having credibility in the organization. So what are the relationships like in the company? Do you have relationships with people in different departments? And then as you become a senior executive, it kind of transfers into, by then you hopefully have good relationships and hopefully you're good at what you do, you're known for that. It's about being an influencer at the table.
I notice that in your new book, there's a chapter about a topic that wasn't addressed in your first book, and that's about mental health and the importance of taking care of yourself from the inside. Tell us about why you included that.
Yeah, the reason I brought it up was my own experience with it. When my mom passed away a couple of years ago before COVID, it was probably one of the busiest years from working outside of the US that I've had in my entire consulting work. And it was fine. I mean, I just kind of went through it. In fact, it was distracting at first to be away from the grief and away from the loss. But about a year later, deep into COVID, I kind of hit a wall. I kind of just felt like I was just really tired all the time and I wasn't as productive. I was like operating at maybe 30%. And I was just wondering what was going on. And I realized that by talking to people, talking with grief counselors, that this grief, right, that I was holding was in my body still, and I hadn't fully dealt with it. So I thought, with this book, I really need to zero in on a topic that's sometimes taboo, right, for Asian Americans. We did not see it modeled.
And Jane Hyun says there's always pressure to adapt to a dominant work culture. But the more grounded we are in our identity and where we come from, the more resilient we can be to thrive and contribute. I'm Kyung-Yoon for Asian American Life.
Christmas Mubarak is an Arabic phrase that means blessed Christmas, and it's a holiday greeting used among many South Asian families who are incorporating Christmas traditions into their holiday celebrations.
I just set up lights in my house, a Christmas tree, and my siblings, we decorate the Christmas tree.
6th student Gursavek Singh says his family has adopted these Christmas traditions over the years while continuing to celebrate their own religious holidays like Diwali.
Christmas Mubarak really kind of illuminates this notion of families that may not be Christian, that bring in specifically Christmas because the kids want it, the families don't mind it, the families don't find any theological issues where it's necessarily taking away or detracting from their faith, and really only see it as a plus.
Kyae Joshi is a professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University who is published in the fields of American religion and Asian American studies, and has an interfaith family that celebrates both Christmas and the Hindu holidays.
Hindu families, Sikh families, Muslim families. I know people across all those faiths that incorporate celebrating Christmas into their holidays.
And these South Asian groups are not alone in this trend. According to a survey by Pew Research Center, 81% of non-Christians in the U.S. celebrate Christmas, and 46% of Americans say they celebrate Christmas primarily as a cultural holiday. For many South Asian families, celebrating Christmas is a way to cultivate a sense of belonging.
My older sister, she wanted a Christmas tree, and we just got one, and we kind of do every year almost.
When your family looks different, when you celebrate things that other kids don't necessarily know about at school, you want to also celebrate what everybody else is celebrating. And that's really where it starts. And then different families will do different things. For example, my mom and dad, we put up a tree. I think from the time I was 5 or 6 years old, we always had a Christmas tree. That didn't mean that my family was any less Hindu than they felt they are. My parents are very religious. They just felt like we are also incorporating in American culture and Christian culture.
And now South Asian groups from various faiths have found ways to incorporate their religious cultures into the Christmas spirit, with creations like Khadija, the first ever Muslim elf on the shelf, and Islamic holiday decor inspired by Christmas, like the crescent moon Eid trees and gingerbread mosques. Still, celebrating Christmas with Santa is a constant classic that appeals to all.
I would say probably 98 or 99% of Indian Hindu families in the United States do that. I would venture that you will find Christmas decorations, Christmas trees, stockings hung by the chimney with care with their names on it. And there's nothing antithetical to their own faith in terms of doing that. With some families, issues may arise where they feel like, okay, am I not being steadfast in my faith? Am I not passing on my faith to my children and letting them do this and bring in Christianity and bring in Christmas? And I think those are questions that people have to answer for themselves. But for the most part, it is really so that kids are feeling a little less left out. And I think it's great because, usually Christmas brings joy, Diwali brings joy, Eid brings joy, various holidays bring joy, and let's have more joy.
For Asian American Life, I'm Susan Jun.
That's our show for now. And if you're in the neighborhood, be sure to come by the Museum of Natural History to check out this year's Origami Tree, Jumping for Joy. It'll be up until January 20th. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Asian American Life. And we have the CUNY TV app, so you can watch us on the go. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo. We'll see you next time.